The river was a black mirror, broken only by the rippling wake of the RIB as it nosed into position beneath the looming steel span. Moonlight fractured across the surface, silver against ink, vanishing the moment it touched the shadow of the bridge. Kesha crouched low in the bow, one gloved hand gripping the side, the torn fabric wet and slick, her other hand resting on her rifle across her knees. The bridge groaned above, each convoy truck rattling its bones, steel humming like a giant machine breathing in the night. Her braids snapped lightly in the wind, a pendulum against the pale line of her armor, ticking off seconds that could not be wasted. She raised her hand, fingers cutting quick signals, the team answering with subtle nods and adjustments of gear. No words were spoken. The river swallowed everything but breath and heartbeat. The RIB drifted until Kesha touched the hull with her boot against a support strut, halting them in the black water beneath the colossus of steel. They moved with practiced silence, each man clipping into rope lines as if in ritual. Boots struck metal ladders with muffled clangs, the sound sharp but brief against the thunder above as another truck rolled across the deck. Kesha followed, HK-416 pressed tight across her chest, plate carrier scraping faintly against damp girders. The smell of oil, rust, and wet steel filled her lungs as she climbed, every rung vibrating with the life of the bridge. The moon slid behind a cloud, smothering the world in deeper shadow. For a heartbeat, only the red glow of a detonator light gave form to the dark, faint and ghostly against the metal ribs. Kesha paused, checking her goggles. Condensation smeared the edges of her vision before she wiped them clear with a thumb. Her breath fogged, pale bursts snatched away by the wind that whistled through hollow beams. Above her, the steel skeleton spread like a cathedral of war, girders stretched in perfect symmetry, rivets swollen with age, bolts singing as they strained under each passing ton of armor. The team fanned out along the underbelly, their movements small and exact, weapons clipped, charges unpacked in ritual silence. Kesha adjusted her grip on the ladder, the torn leather of her glove sticking for a moment before she pulled free, leaving a faint smear of blood across steel. Her boots clanged against the first grate, a hollow echo that carried out into the river. She froze, every muscle tight, eyes scanning the lattice above. The convoy rumbled on, indifferent, its vibration masking the sound as if the bridge itself had swallowed the noise. She exhaled slowly, then pressed forward, guiding her team across the skeleton like shadows threading through veins of iron. The water below was a restless abyss, black current rushing between pylons, swirling eddies catching fragments of light. One slip, one misstep, and a man would vanish without sound, dragged under faster than a cry could leave his lips. The thought hung in the cold air, sharpening every motion to surgical precision. Kesha's boots gripped the grating, her braid whipping as she signaled two men to break left, planting the first charges along the nearest support beam. Each timer blinked red in rhythm with the bridge's heartbeat, a pulse against the night. Wires crackled faintly as they were stripped and twisted, sparks glowing like fireflies before dying in the wind. Kesha crouched to check connections, her rifle balanced across her knees, the metal warm against her soaked gloves. She touched the detonator casing as though it were a living thing, feeling the vibration of the bridge travel through it like blood through veins. A tank passed overhead, its treads grinding thunder into the span, rattling dust from rivets and shaking the men beneath like insects clinging to a drum. Kesha braced herself, helmet pressed against cold steel, the goggles on her brow fogging from heat and friction. The vibration was constant, a mechanical heartbeat pressing through her armor into her chest, threatening to blur thought with sheer force. And then it passed, leaving silence so stark it felt like an accusation. She glanced upward. Moonlight cut through the clouds again, striking rivets and beams into silver, while the river below reflected a broken lattice of light. The bridge was alive, vast and merciless, its body of steel bones thrumming with every convoy. To sabotage it felt like carving into a beast's spine, every touch of wire and charge deliberate, each motion a cut toward paralysis. Kesha's eyes narrowed. There would be no hesitation. The men moved in rhythm, bent low, backs brushing against girders as they worked. Every snap of Velcro, every metallic click, seemed too loud, swallowed only by the drone of engines above. Sparks flickered as cutters bit into steel, brief arcs of orange swallowed by black water below. Kesha raised her fist, halting motion for a breathless moment, listening, but only the steel's hum replied. Her HK-416 shifted on its sling, brushing the plate carrier straps scuffed and damp with spray. She adjusted the hydration tube running along her gear, its plastic tapping faintly against the rifle stock. Her knife handle jutted at her hip, cold metal dulled from use, glinting as moonlight bent through the beams. Everything about her was function, every object on her body part of the mission's equation. She crouched low, signaling again, pushing the team forward along the scaffolding. The grates swayed under their combined weight, cables creaking, rivets whispering as if ready to snap. Sweat stung her eyes despite the cold, and she wiped it away with the back of her torn glove, smearing dirt across her cheek. Ahead, a crossbeam waited, a natural choke point where the next set of charges must be placed. Her boots rang once more, the sound buried in the grind of another convoy passing above. The trucks rattled like bones in a chest, the bridge groaning under strain, each rivet groan echoing into the black water below. Kesha's braid swung as she turned to oversee the wiring, the red glow of the timer painting her face in brief, bloody light. Time was now a shadow, ticking across her features, the pendulum of survival swinging with each breath. They were inside the machine, swallowed whole by its body of steel and weight. The bridge was not just a structure but a world, alive, dangerous, a predator that would kill them the moment silence broke. Kesha felt the truth press against her chest like the weight of her rifle. Every second in shadow was borrowed, every sound a step closer to death. Precision was survival, speed was life, and the mission was balanced on a razor's edge of steel. And still, they moved forward, silent shapes against a living colossus, carving time into steel with sparks and blood. The first sound was not the flare, but the scrape of boots on a catwalk above, sharp and unmasked. Keisha froze mid-motion, hand hovering over a detonator line, eyes narrowing into the lattice of steel above her head. A shadow leaned into the moonlight, the faint arc of a flashlight beam cutting through the girders. She raised her fist in warning, but the silence fractured too late. A shot cracked, not from her team, but from the startled patrolman. The flare gun kicked back in his grip, and a streak of white fire soared upward, blooming into a blistering sun that seared the night. Shadows shredded under its light, the underbelly of the bridge revealed in stark silver and black. Kesha's braid whipped as she turned, rifle coming up, finger tight against the trigger. Her suppressed burst cut the flare gunner down before he could shout. Brass rattled through the grate, falling with a hiss into the black water below. But the damage was done. The flare burned overhead. Its reflection slashed across the river, a beacon announcing their presence to every ear within range. Keisha's jaw clenched as the bridge rumbled with new life. "Finish the wiring," she ordered into comms, voice tight, clipped. Two SEALs bent back to their charges without hesitation, fingers trembling but exact as they stripped insulation and twisted wires under the fading glow of their red lamps. The rest shifted weapons, spreading along beams like predators in the steel ribs. Kesha pivoted toward the sound of running boots, rifle steady against her shoulder. The patrol descended fast, steel vibrating under their weight, voices sharp in a language carried clear by the girders. Muzzle flashes sparked white through crossbeams as the first round snapped past. Kesha returned fire, her suppressed HK-416 chattering, sparks bouncing from rivets as rounds ricocheted into the dark. Her braid slapped against her shoulder as she swung to track another target, goggles fogging in the heat of sudden exertion. Casing after casing slipped through the grate, flashing once before vanishing into the black current. The water swallowed the sound, but the bridge gave it back, amplifying the firefight into a drumbeat of steel and fire. Sparks from a charge cutter joined the mix, glowing briefly like fireflies before vanishing into the void. The underbelly of the bridge became a storm of noise and shadow, balanced on wires and beams. 3 minutes on the line, one of her men hissed, crouched over the detonator harness. His voice was urgent but controlled, the kind of composure that only came from years of training under fire. Kesha answered with silence, the rhythm of her bursts speaking for her. Above, boots hammered steel with relentless percussion as reinforcements closed the gap. The flare still burned, its light dripping into the river below like molten fire. Every beam it touched revealed too much the men crouched with charges, the black shine of Keisha's rifle, the gloss of her torn gloves. She felt the mission narrowing into a blade edge. One misstep, 1 second wasted, and the bridge would turn from target to tomb. Rounds hissed past, one snapping a rivet free, the steel bolt whistling into the night like shrapnel. Kesha pressed flat against a girder, then leaned out, cutting down a soldier as he leaned to fire through the grate. Blood spattered against steel, stark and bright under moonlight, smeared by the vibration of boots rushing forward. Her breath fogged in bursts, every exhale stolen by the wind. Another team member fired, the crack of his suppressed rifle almost delicate in the chaos. A man screamed and fell, his body bouncing against beams before splashing into the current. The river claimed him in silence, but the shouts of his comrades redoubled, boots striking the steel like war drums. The bridge was alive now, a machine convulsing in violence. Kesha signaled 2 men forward, angling them to hold the choke point at a ladder junction. Their rifles snapped in rhythm, muzzle flashes, lighting beams in brief. Brutal strobe. Brass cascaded through the grate, pattering down like rain against the river. Sparks fell from the wiring station, showering the crouched men who kept working despite the firefight. She shifted to cover them, dropping one target with a double tap through the grating. Her gloves slipped briefly on the wet steel, the torn fabric peeling against rust, but she gripped harder, planting herself like a wedge in the machine. Her braid whipped across her cheek as she leaned and fired again. The bridge vibrated beneath her boots, every impact magnified by the convoy still crawling overhead. Charges almost set another voice cracked in her ear. The words gave her no comfort. They meant more exposure, more time to cover, more seconds the enemy could exploit. She fired another burst, sparks from ricochet raining down against the black surface of the water. The flare sputtered overhead, but even fading, it painted them in silver light. Kesha's calm pressed hard against the rising tide of fear. Her eyes narrowed, movements precise, every decision chiseled into the moment without hesitation. Her team fed off it, their discipline holding the line even as enemy shouts multiplied, echoing across girders like a chorus of steel. The patrol had become a tide, and every rifle burst was a sandbag against flood. Another shot cracked too close, spitting sparks inches from her head. She ducked, boots slipping, her rifle scraping loud against the steel. She caught herself on the girder, breath burning in her chest, then swung back to fire in reply. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the sound almost lost in the storm of steel and fire. The detonator lights glowed faintly, steady as heartbeats against the chaos. Sparks spat from the wiring, glowing against the damp steel before they vanished. They were fragile, defiant stars in the belly of the machine, each one a reminder that the mission still lived. Kesha's eyes flicked toward them, not as comfort, but as demand. The bridge groaned under another heavy truck, vibrations rattling through their bones. Above, more boots struck the grates, and shadows leapt into beams of searchlight sweeping wide. Kesha fired again, every burst a wedge of defiance against a world that was now fully awake. The flare still hung in the sky, burning down like a fuse. She pressed against the girder, torn gloves bloody, rifle hot in her hands, braid snapping against her back. Around her, the seals fought with precision carved into chaos, their shadows flickering across the underbelly of the beast. Time had shifted. Stealth was gone. Survival now the only weapon, and every second bought in fire pushed them closer to breaking the spine of the machine. Engines screamed overhead as the convoy ground to a halt, the sudden silence of movement replaced by shouted orders and boots hammering steel. Searchlights snapped on, white blades of light cutting across the smoke, slicing the underbelly and spilling illumination into the dark river below. Kesha pressed her back against a girder, torn gloves slick with blood and sweat. HK-416 pressed to her shoulder. Her braid lashed in the wind, a tether anchoring her against the storm as the bridge shook under the weight of war. Up, she barked into comms, voice swallowed by the clash of noise, but her team understood. One after another they climbed the vertical ladder, boots clanging hollow against rungs, their shadows flickering in the glare of moving beams. Kesha went last, fingers leaving red streaks along the steel as she hauled herself onto the grating of the deck. The bridge groaned under trucks idling nose to tail, exhaust clouding into the moonlight, black silhouettes against fire-white searchlights. The first burst of tracer fire split the dark. Red lines slashed across the span, ricocheting sparks from girders, bouncing bright fragments into the void. Kesha ducked, goggles fogging in the sudden heat, then rose, shouldering her rifle and snapping precise shots through the chaos. Brass clattered against steel, skittered across grates, and vanished into the river. Enemy soldiers spilled from trucks, boots pounding rhythm into the deck like war drums. Rifles flared, their fire snapping into beams, every round an angry spark against the structure. The SEALs moved with controlled violence, darting between girders, crouching low, returning bursts that stitched shadows into collapsing bodies. The bridge became a cage of thunder and sparks, each muzzle flash mirrored in rivets like molten eyes. Kesha dropped behind a support strut, breath ragged, her gloves torn open to raw skin. The bridge vibrated under her boots, every tremor a reminder that this suspended battlefield was alive, groaning under its own weight. She popped out, squeezed the trigger, felt her rifle buck 3 times, and saw one soldier collapse, his weapon skittering across the grate. Moonlight carved a silver edge along her helmet, her braid whipping across her shoulder as she pivoted back into cover. Another SEAL slid beside her, reloading, his face streaked with oil and sweat. Charges halfway set, he shouted, voice ragged over the gunfire. Kesha nodded. No time for more, then leaned into the open, cutting another burst across the deck. Sparks spat from the girder as return fire chewed metal inches from her head. The air filled with smoke, exhaust mingling with gunpowder, the stench of burning oil rising into the night. Searchlights swung wildly, sometimes blinding them, sometimes catching the gleam of sweat on enemy faces. Shadows twisted across beams as figures darted, rifles raised, boots clanging a relentless rhythm against the hollow steel. The battle was suspended in midair, every step measured against the abyss beneath. Kesha climbed the nearest girder, blood smearing the steel under her torn glove. She hauled herself up, rifle slung, boots scrabbling for purchase on cold rivets. From above, she leaned out and fired downward, cutting angles her team couldn't reach, bursts of fire flashing against black water below. Bullets punched sparks around her, fragments of steel singing into the void. But she held her perch, braid snapping like a banner in the wind. Below, one of her men shouted, 2 minutes over the din, detonator wiring glowing faint red against the steel. Time had shrunk into a fuse, short, merciless, sparking closer to detonation with every shot fired. Kesha dropped from the girder, boots slamming into the deck, knees jarring with the impact, and immediately rolled to cover behind a truck tire. Enemy fire riddled the steel skin inches above her head, hot shards spattering her helmet. She pivoted, leveled her rifle beneath the chassis, and squeezed, muzzle flashes reflected against rivets as rounds tore into legs. Screams ripped across the deck, boots pounding in frantic rhythm, but she did not hesitate. She shifted her aim, cut another soldier down, then rolled back into the smoke. Her chest heaved, lungs filling with metallic haze, but her resolve stayed sharp as a blade. Searchlights snapped down the length of the bridge, exposing her team in jagged slices. One SEAL crouched, laying suppressive fire as another wired the final charge. Sparks cascaded from his cutter, glowing orange against his gloves before falling through the grate. Kesha covered them, her shots measured and relentless, her torn gloves slipping but never losing grip on her rifle. The bridge thundered again as another armored vehicle edged forward, treads gnashing steel. The whole structure trembled, bolts groaning, rivets whining as if the machine itself were straining to survive. Muzzle flashes lit its silhouette, sparks leaping from its sides as bullets stitched uselessly against armor. Kesha's braid whipped against her plate carrier as she signaled her team to fall back, her own bursts cracking to hold the enemy tied. Moonlight broke through a rift in the clouds, glinting silver on her goggles, fogged and smeared from smoke. Her silhouette was carved into the chaos rifle raised, boots braced wide on trembling grates, blood streaking her gloves. The bridge roared around her, engines, rifles, and steel colliding in a mechanical scream. Yet, she stood in the storm, a human figure tethered by grit and willpower against the collapse of shadow into fire. Another team member's voice rasped into comms. Final charge set. The words barely cut through the maelstrom, but they were enough. Kesha fired one last burst, then signaled the retreat, her arms slicing through the smoke like a blade. Her men broke backward along the grates, boots hammering a rhythm of urgency, while she stayed to cover their retreat, her rifle sparking defiance into the storm. The bridge was no longer just steel and rivets. It was a crucible, alive and hostile, groaning under its own weight, shaking with the violence poured into its frame. Rifle flashes were sparks of rebellion against inevitability. Every muzzle burst a fragment of human defiance against overwhelming machine power. Kesha moved through it like a ghost tethered to fire, her braid lashing in the wind, her torn gloves bleeding into steel. Every step forward was bought in fire, every second clawed against annihilation. The SEALs carved their way across the suspended deck, rifles blazing, sparks raining, boots pounding like drums on hollow grates. Moonlight fractured across smoke and steel, glinting on rivets, fogging goggles, bleeding into the black current below. And, in the storm of steel and fire, Kesha knew the truth. The bridge was not merely their target, but the arena of judgment, and survival would be won or lost on its spine of iron. The charges were armed. The red glow of their timers winked from the steel like heartbeats, steady and merciless. Kesha's comms crackled with confirmation, but her eyes were already fixed on the flood of reinforcements at both ends of the bridge. Engines roared, trucks screeched to halts, and mounted guns swiveled toward the SEALs trapped on the deck. "Move!" she shouted, voice clipped, driving her team toward the eastern catwalk. Boots hammered hollow grates, the sound a frantic rhythm against the deeper thunder of enemy fire. Spotlights snapped across the span, sweeping wide beams of white that cut through smoke like blades. Every sweep revealed them, wet armor gleaming, rifles flashing, blood marking the steel. The first burst from a mounted gun tore the air, rounds chewing sparks from girders, shrapnel biting into the deck. Kesha ducked low, goggles streaked with grime, rifle clutched tight as she returned fire. Brass clattered against the grate, bouncing once before vanishing into black water below. The bridge groaned as trucks shifted, the strain of their weight a chorus of steel pain. She pushed forward, firing in bursts to clear a lane. One teammate faltered, a round grazing his thigh, dropping him to one knee. Kesha grabbed his harness, yanking him up with a grunt, her braid plastered to her plate carrier with sweat. "On me!" she snapped, forcing him back into motion, her rifle still barking over her shoulder. Bullets stitched the deck at their heels, sparks cascading through the grates like fiery waterfalls. Ricochets screamed across beams, ringing high-pitched into the night. The air was filled with metallic shrieks, of steel, of engines, of weapons colliding in violence. Kesha's heartbeat merged with the clang of boots, each step a countdown against annihilation. A spotlight pinned them, blinding white glare washing over their helmets. Kesha pivoted, dropped to a knee, and fired. Her shots shattered the lamp, glass exploding outward in a shower of sparks that fell into the river. For one heartbeat, darkness embraced them again, fragile, fleeting, precious. The bridge answered with more violence. Another truck rolled forward, its mounted gun opening fire, rounds slamming into steel, shredding rivets that shrieked as they tore loose. A crossbeam fractured, groaning in agony, sparks showering into the black current below. The entire span shuddered, alive with the strain of machines and the weight of death. Kesha pushed her team hard across the catwalk, forcing speed over caution. Boots rang against the hollow deck, every impact amplified into the night. The smell of burning oil and cordite filled her lungs, choking her breath with smoke. Still, her voice carried through comms, sharp, unwavering, cutting through fear like a blade. Keep moving. Charges are live. We finish this. Her words steadied them, even as bullets snapped inches from their heads. A ricochet screamed past her ear, tearing a chunk of steel from the girder she brushed against. The torn leather of her gloves slipped on the blood-slick surface, but she caught herself, gritting her teeth as she hauled forward. Her HK-416 cracked in short bursts, precise even as her body screamed from fatigue. The river was close now, black water rushing beneath the lattice of beams. Spray licked up from the current, cool against her sweat-soaked face. Her goggles streaked again, fogging from exertion, and she shoved them up, eyes sharp in the moonlight. She could smell freedom in the damp air, and the abyss waiting to swallow them whole. Another SEAL staggered, hit in the shoulder, rifle slipping from his grip. Kesha was there, dragging him upright, shoving his weapon back into his hands. Her braid thrashed across her helmet as she leaned into the push, body straining to carry both herself and her teammate. Leadership was weight, and she bore it without pause. Behind them, enemy boots hammered steel, closing the distance. Shouts carried, echoing through girders, amplified into something inhuman. Kesha fired again, her muzzle flash mirrored in rivets, sparks leaping into shadows. The bridge shook beneath her as if rejecting them, a machine no longer willing to hold its intruders. Searchlights swept again, catching the edge of their retreat. Kesha dove sideways, her shoulder slamming into a girder, her rifle spitting fire to cover her team. The torn gloves on her hands gripped steel one last time, slipping against rust, but anchoring her long enough to rise. She spat breath into the night, a growl, and pressed onward, clip ropes. On my mark. Her order crackled through the haze. The river loomed beneath, black and endless, salvation and grave in one. Harness carabiners snapped onto steel lines, a chain of trust forged under fire. Kesha was last, always last, her rifle still cutting sparks into the dark. The mounted guns roared again, chewing the bridge into a storm of metal and flame. Sparks rained in sheets, glowing orange against the black current before vanishing. Ricochets screamed past, slamming into beams, shrieking like banshees. The air was filled with noise, mechanical, brutal, unrelenting. Now she barked. Her team leapt, one by one, bodies vanishing into the abyss, ropes trailing like lifelines into the dark. Bullets chased them, tearing spray into the current, but the river claimed them fast, silent. Kesha stood alone for a heartbeat longer, braid whipping, rifle hot and empty in her hands. She turned, fired the last rounds from her sidearm, the muzzle flashes small but defiant against the storm. Enemy fire erupted back, sparks exploding around her, fragments slashing across her armor. She holstered, clipped, and leapt, her braid snapping once, her gloves torn raw as she left steel behind. For an instant she was weightless, suspended between fire and water. The river swallowed her with a roar, cold and absolute. Sound vanished, replaced by rushing current, the silence heavy, merciful. The world above raged on, bullets cracking, engines screaming, steel groaning. But down here only the river ruled. Kesha surfaced with a gasp, spray in her mouth, her braid plastered to her plate carrier, goggles smeared. Her team bobbed nearby, heads low in the current, rifles clutched tight. They were alive, battered, bleeding, but alive. Kesha kicked hard, driving them toward the exfil boat downstream. Her chest heaved, but her eyes burned with resolve, steel hard even in exhaustion. The mission was no longer about planting charges. It was about surviving the price of success, about trusting steel and fire to finish what their rifles could not. The bridge loomed above, searchlights slashing futilely at the water. But they were ghosts now. And as the river carried them into the dark, Kesha knew the cost had been paid in full. The boat skimmed low against the current, its engine muted, the night pressing close around them. Kesha crouched at the prow, Goggles fogged and streaked, braid plastered flat against her plate carrier with sweat and river spray. Her gloves, torn and bloodied, dripped into the water as she gripped the rubber gunwale. Behind her, the SEALs sat in silence, boots soaked and heavy, rifles laid across their laps like exhausted extensions of themselves. The bridge loomed above, its steel ribs glowing faintly in the distance with the pulsing red blink of charges. It looked less like an engineering feat and more like a wounded beast, groaning under the weight of convoys still forcing their way across. Trucks rumbled along its spine, tank treads grinding sparks from the grates, oblivious to the death strung beneath them. The sound carried across the river, low and constant, a mechanical heartbeat ticking toward rupture. Spray hit her face as the boat turned downstream, droplets cold against the heat radiating from her skin. She adjusted her rifle against her knees, feeling the weapon's warmth still lingering from the firefight. Every man sat hunched, their armor dark with water and blood, eyes fixed not on one another, but on the silhouette of the bridge. Silence reigned, broken only by the churn of the river and the faint whine of stressed steel. Kesha lifted the detonator from her chest rig, the small box slick with condensation and grime. Its red light blinked steady, a heartbeat in her palm, fragile but inexorable. She stared at it without expression, her breathing heavy, chest rising against soaked straps. The mission had shrunk to this moment. One press, one irreversible command, one choice carried on her thumb. The river reflected the bridge, moonlight fractured into shards across black water. Every pulse of the charges winked against the current, sparks of red fireflies glowing beneath the steel monster. Her braid shifted against her back as the wind changed, cool and sharp, carrying the smell of oil and iron. The bridge seemed alive still, unaware that its death was already sealed. One SEAL shifted, boots sloshing in the bottom of the boat, but he said nothing. His face was drawn, eyes hollow in the faint red glow, rifle balanced loosely across his knees. Another coughed, blood flecking the water on his glove, but his grip on his sidearm never wavered. They were warriors hollowed by survival, still tethered to the fight even in silence. Kesha raised her eyes again, watching as another convoy rolled onto the span. Headlights flared against the steel, bright and oblivious, horns blaring as vehicles pressed forward. The bridge groaned louder, its bolts screaming faintly with the strain, rivets shivering against impossible weight. The enemy still trusted their machine, never knowing it was already condemned. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. For a moment, the silence deepened, heavy as the river pressing against the hull. Every sound sharpened, water slapping rubber, steel groaning, the faint hiss of her own breath through gritted teeth. Her gloves trembled, leather peeling at the seams, but her grip on fate was absolute. She pressed. For a second, nothing moved. Then the river lit with fire, charges bursting in sequence, a chain of sparks igniting along the steel ribs. The bridge convulsed. A beast finally struck, beams snapping with thunder that rolled through the night. Flames shot upward, reflected tenfold on the black current, painting the sky with an inferno's glow. Convoys toppled mid-span, tanks and trucks tearing free as the structure broke beneath them. Metal screamed, rivets snapping loose, cables whiplashing in arcs of fire. Vehicles plunged into the river, water erupting upward in geysers of spray and burning fuel. The bridge's spine cracked in two, one half tilting, the other collapsing, swallowed in a roar that consumed sky and water alike. The boat rocked violently under the shockwave, spray drenching the team as they ducked instinctively. Heat washed across them, orange fire reflected in their goggles, sparks raining like molten stars. Kesha stayed upright, staring into the firestorm, braid plastered across her chest, eyes unblinking. Her face was carved in shadow and light, expressionless, even as steel fell like rain. The roar stretched on, a drawn-out scream of destruction swallowed slowly by the river. Flames guttered along broken beams before smoke drowned them, thick plumes spiraling upward into moonlight. Debris floated downstream, tires, beams, fragments of metal glowing hot against the current. The river claimed everything without care, erasing battle into black silence. Her team exhaled in ragged unison, some leaning back against the boat, others still crouched, weapons tight. No cheer, no words, only the heavy rhythm of men who had carried fire and returned alive. Boots dripped, soaked and bloodied, leaving streaks of river water in the bottom of the boat. The mission was finished, but none of them looked relieved. Kesha lowered the detonator into her lap, thumb still resting on the button, though the job was already done. She drew a long breath, chest rising under her plate carrier, then let it out slow, mist curling from her lips into the night. Her braid clung tight to her armor, a dark tether binding her to the moment, to the silence after destruction. She turned her gaze downstream, past fire and smoke, into the black horizon. The bridge was gone, reduced to twisted steel and fire scattered across the river. Yet, its absence carried weight, a void filled with consequence. Sabotage was not only destruction, it was transformation, cutting arteries so others might breathe. Kesha's eyes reflected the flames, but were already searching the dark beyond. The river bore them onward, current pulling, spray flicking against their faces. The seals sat in silence, their exhaustion a living presence in the boat, armor heavy, weapons scarred. But in each of them was the same steel-hard resolve, carved deeper by survival. They had bled against iron and returned as shadows, still bound to the war's endless chain. Kesha tightened her grip on the rifle across her lap, its barrel blackened, stock scratched and wet. It was still warm, still heavy, still needed. She looked back once at the burning ruin of the bridge, then forward into the night, her face set like iron. The mission was over, but the war was not. Her braid swayed in the wind as the boat slipped into deeper shadow. Behind her, fire consumed the night. Ahead, only darkness waited. She carried both, the destruction she had wrought and the road still ahead. In silence, Kesha pressed forward, eyes locked beyond the flames, already measuring the next fight.